Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time it is that you're joining me for this video. Thank you once again for clicking on the Penboy Roy Fountain Pen Review channel. The subject of today's video is the Jinhao 159 Fountain Pen. There isn't much in the way of background information on the Jinhao brand that I could find. Anything and everything I could find was pretty general and vague. But here's what I found. The brand was established in the year 1988 in China. I don't know by who, but I can say this much. It was probably a Chinese person. The company has been in business producing very low-cost pens, oftentimes drawing inspiration from other luxury brands in the industry. They employ over 300 underpaid employees and market their products to everyone and anyone willing to buy them. Regarding the 159, it is safe to say that this pen is inspired by the Montblanc 149 based on its overall size, shape, and numerical name. Other than these elements, there are few things that this pen shares with the actual Montblanc 149, with major differences being the filling mechanism, nib materials, packaging, body construction, and of course, the pricing. Even in the naming of the Jinhao 159 versus the Montblanc 149, each number of the 149 has a designated meaning. The 1 indicates Meisterstück, the 4 indicates the filling mechanism, and the 9 indicates the nib size, whereas with the Jinhao 159, each number means nothing. That's all I have for the background information. Moving on to the neutral zone. Those elements about the pen that are neither good or bad, or can be good or bad, depending on you. Right after this short commercial break.
Do you waste page after page when writing because your handwriting really sucks? Does your boss ream you out at work because he just can't read your sucky handwriting? Do your ideas get tossed aside like garbage because your handwriting sucks? Well, don't give up hope just yet. Thanks to the new Esterbrook SD, you now have all the tools you need to write your thoughts and ideas clearly and neatly. Looking for a raise? There is simply no better way to ask your boss than on paper with a fine fountain pen. By using your new Esterbrook SD, your boss will no doubt entertain and comply with all of your requests and demands with enthusiasm. And voila, all is right in the world. That is until he says, "But I'm gonna need you to shave."
For a limited time, get a free Proraso Shave Travel Kit, a $15 value with the purchase of any Esterbrook SD. Esterbrook, the right pen for the way you write. The nib is an in-house made steel nib. It's a number 6 size nib and has gear-shaped scrolling along the shoulders of the nib. Under the breather hole is the brand logo of 2 people on a horse and carriage. Under that is the Jinhao brand name. Under that is 18 kgp to indicate the nib is 18 karat gold plated, which is a total lie. There is no actual gold anywhere on this pen. The feed is your standard cheapy plastic feed that is found in many modern fountain pens. The nib and feed are friction fit into an unscrewable nib unit housing. The grip is a tapered grip that comes to a slight flare created by the metal collar at the start of the grip. The grip threads are a metal assembly and screw into the barrel's metal thread assembly with threads on both inside and outside. The barrel is a tapering cigar-shaped lacquered metal barrel with a metal ring placed at the end to create an aesthetic similar to that of the Montblanc 149. On this pen, however, the end is not a piston knob, rather a fixed end cap. The cap is also lacquered metal as the rest of the pen. The finial is rounded and plain with no logos or branding. The clip is tension fixed and is secured to the underside of the finial. The clip design is of a sword and shield with the logo of the people riding a horse and carriage on the shield. The center band is a single wedding band style center band with Jinhao on the front and 159 on the rear. The pen, depending on where you buy it, comes in a plastic baggie taped shut with Scotch tape. That's all I have for the neutral zone. Moving on to the good. Those elements about the pen that are good. So here's the pen writing like a dream. But the reason is not because the natural state of the pen out of the plastic baggie it came in, but because an additional $15 investment into it by purchasing a Goulet No. 6 nib to replace the stock Jinhao nib. As it is now, the pen writes with a nib that costs more than the entire pen. I typically don't like to do cross-branded nib swaps or exchange a pen from its natural state when it's brand new, because the very act of altering a pen adds variables that change the baseline state of the pen, and the review becomes less applicable to everyone at any level of fountain pen virus infection. For example, Swapping out the nib may be easy for me, but difficult for someone else, and a less experienced attempt could possibly result in time misalignment and an end experience that is not similar to mine. In that event, I failed in providing reliable information to a person that relied on my review before investing money into a pen. But the experience of the stock nib was rather unfavorable, and I chose to swap the nib to give my savage viewers an option should they so desire. Moving on to the build. I find that the overall construction of this pen to be sturdy. Being that the pen is made of metal, it can take a pretty decent beating. I've even used one of these in the past to hammer a nail into a wall because I didn't have an actual hammer. After I got the nail hammered into the wall, the pen did have some significant battle damage, but it was superficial. The pen still wrote, capped, and posted with no problem. It sure did look ugly, but it looked ugly to begin with anyway, so no huge loss there. Being that it's such an accessible and inexpensive pen, replacing it wasn't such a big deal. Since we're on the topic of cost, moving on to the bad, let's talk coin. This pen is sold at various online outlets by reputable retailers such as Goulet pens, all the way down to Amazon and eBay, with prices ranging from $5 to $12 depending on where you choose to buy the pen. Regardless of where you buy it, the pen won't be coming with any bells and whistles other than the included converter. However, for what it costs, not having any branded packaging or literature is something I'm more than comfortable living with. That's all I have for the bad. Moving on to the ugly. Those elements about the pen that should not be, but are. So I always say, any amount of money, no matter how little, is too much to pay for something if it doesn't perform as it should. In the case of the Jinhao 159, specifically this pen here, I find the nib to be smooth and adjusted properly. The reason it's here in the ugly is because when it writes with its stock nib, it goes from being very wet to moderately dry to ink-starved. This has happened every time I wrote with the pen and typically takes about a page before it starts acting up. I found myself opening up the pen and priming it several times. I personally don't like having to do this. While I do understand that this pen is highly mass-produced and may be a fluke, I can only say, once again, that I have to take the sample I have as a representation of the whole. Could this be a fluke? Sure. But I had the same issue with the aforementioned 159 I used to hammer the nail into a wall. Why does the pen write like this? I'm guessing it may have to do with a less refined polishing process of the nib because I noticed the issue wasn't present when I swapped out the nib with a Goulet No. 6 Yovo nib. When I used the Goulet nib, I found the pen's writing experience to be completely different and favorable. But that comes with having to buy the extra nib for $15 at Goulet pens, making the overall cost of the pen around $20 to $27, again, depending on where it is that you choose to buy the pen. Moving on to design. It's just an ugly looking pen without the finesse, refinement, and class that the pen it was inspired by possesses. But this has nothing to do with how it performs, and a low price point at this point makes this element acceptable. Some may find the massive, bulging look appealing. However, I'm confident in saying that there are few people out there that would describe this pen upon looking at it as beautiful. Again, it's cheap, so it's no big deal. That's all I have for the ugly. It's high noon. Decision-making time. Should you or should you not pull the trigger on the Jinhao 159 fountain pen? I hear a lot of good things about the Jinhao brand. The company provides a huge selection of fountain pens with designs inspired by pens that cost 10 to even 100 times more than what Jinhao pens cost. I find at times people will forgive a lot of faults in pens for different reasons. Sometimes it's because the pen is beautiful, rare, unique, or in the case of this pen, really cheap. But in the case of my Jinhao 159, is the pen really that cheap? Considering that in order to get it to write favorably, I had to spend a total of $27. I don't think so. Not with options like the TWSBI Eco, Lamy Safari, and Pilot Metropolitan easily and readily available in the same price range, if not even a touch less money. In that case, I'd have to say hold off and don't pull the trigger on this pen. But what about the fountain pen virus-infected individual that already has those pens and wants to try something newer? Or just wants to know what writing with a cucumber feels like? I would then say that pulling the trigger is not a bad idea, so long as you don't mind paying for the additional cost of a Goulet No. 6 Yovo nib to install in place of the nib that it comes with. This combo makes for a good writing experience, with the only caveat being that the nib is worth more than the actual pen itself, and it looks a lot like a robot stink pickle. But without the additional purchase of the No. 6 Goulet nib, I just don't see this pen holding its own, based solely on its own merits. Lastly, what about someone that just wants to buy the pen and stick with the stock nib because it's cheap and they're new to fountain pens? My concern would be that they end up with a nib like mine and now have a bad impression of fountain pens, especially being that they are new to fountain pens and don't have the experience or ability to swap out nibs or even fix the stock nib that comes with the pen themselves. If that's the case, I say again, don't pull the trigger on this pen. You're better off with other inexpensive options, even if it means a less durable pen and a smaller pen. If you're new to fountain pens and want to try it and end up with a nib that doesn't have issues, then great. It was only about 10 bucks. And if you do have issues, as I did, buying it from gouletpens.com will give you the advantage of having more options of resolution, as the people working there are genuinely passionate about making you happy with your pen, and they're willing to engage in dialogue that will educate and help you. Now, I'm not paid or sponsored to say any of this stuff. I just genuinely believe it based on my interactions with the customer service staff over at Goulet Pens. But I can see that if you do get this in the future, you're going to end up craving an experience that has more to offer, as your sensitivity and tastes quickly outgrow what this pen has to offer with its stock nib. That was my review on the Jinhao 159 fountain pen. I hope you found it helpful. Thanks again for watching. Love you guys. Be well, be safe.